Queen forks can be set up in many different ways. One way you can do that is to use a check fork. If you look at this board right in front of us, if the queen moved to the E1 square, it will set up a check fork where the king is in check and the king has to move. Now, there's one caveat or some caveats when setting up a check fork, and the first caveat is that if you look at this rook right here, or this other piece that's getting forked besides the king, that piece must have no defender defending it, otherwise the fork won't work. Another caveat is that moving the king out of check does not set up a discovered check. And what we mean by that is you don't want to put your king in check when you set up a fork here. So let's say this board is fine, but let's change the board around a little bit and add a couple pieces. Okay, we've got these new pieces right here. Now, yeah, there's a fork here, a fork check. However, when black moves, that puts white's king in check. And in this case, white will not be able to take advantage of the check fork because of the discovered check. Now let's shift gears and look at a game situation of a check fork. Now if you look at the board for white, what white would like to do is white wants to take the knight on c3 and advance it to b5, and then to c7 and set up a check fork of the rook and the king. And white has this bishop defending that square. So white goes ahead and moves to b5. Now it's black's turn to move, and black needs to figure out a way to defend against this. Well, if we analyze the board and look a little bit deeper, we'll notice that this knight on b5 does not have a defender defending it. And if you look even further, we'll notice that the a5 square is open for the black queen. And if you look even further, we'll notice that that a5 square would set up a check. So black moves to the a5 square with the queen and sets up a check fork. And no matter how white responds in this situation, black is going to win that piece, or the knight on b5. Now let's take another look at an example of a check fork. This time it's white to move. If you'd like, go ahead and hit pause. Okay, if we analyze this board here, we'll notice that there's two pieces here that have no defender. And if we look a little further, okay, we see that the bishop on g7 can't really be got at, so we can kind of eliminate that one. But the knight is a possibility. If we'll notice that the knight's path intersects with the king's path at the a4 square. If we also look further, we'll notice that the queen's path, or the queen, can reach that square. And if we take this a step further, we'll also notice that none of black's pieces can get there. So all white has to do is simply move the queen to a4 and set up a check fork. And in this case, black will have to defend it, or move the king somehow, or defend it. In this case, the best move for black is simply take the knight on b8 and stick it in front of the king, but that's still going to result in a loss of the e4 knight. Now let's take another look at an example of a check fork and the mechanics of setting this up. Okay, if we scan the board on this example here, we'll notice that it's white to move, and well, there's this rook here, and that rook has no defender. Okay. Well, let's look at the one line that white can use in the king, and that's this line right here. Now, when we're attacking the rook, we want to make sure we have a diagonal line, because the rook can move vertically and horizontally, so that line won't work. But if we look at this line right here, it intersects the king's path, and it happens to intersect on the c2 square. And if we look even further, we'll notice that black does not have any pieces defending that square, so all white needs to do is move the queen to c2, and that sets up a check fork where black will have to move to defend the king. In this case, they'll move the pawn forward, and white then just captures the rook on d1. Now let's take a look at another simplistic version of a check fork. Here we have a bishop defending the king. And if we look at this board even closer, we'll notice that the bishop has no defender defending it. Now, what we want to do is we want to look at lines that the queen can attack from. In this case, we'll look at the vertical and horizontal lines on the bishop. Okay, and then next we'll look at some vertical and horizontal lines on the king. And if we'll notice, there's two intersect points. Those are the A4 square and the E8 square. And if you look at the queen's potential moves, the queen can only move to one of those squares, and that happens to be the A4 square. And if we go ahead and we move the queen to the A4 square, that sets up a check fork. And in this case, black will have to move the king, and white will capture the bishop on A8. Now, setting up a check fork is pretty straightforward, but if we want to set up a regular queen fork, it can be a little bit trickier because of some of the complexities involved. It may look simple on the surface, but it can get complicated. First of all, you need to have two pieces with no defender defending it, or no potential defender defending it, as we'll see later on. Next, both paths need to intersect, and that intersection point needs to be accessible to the queen to set up the fork. Now, that square must also be undefended by another piece. And another caveat or thing to watch out for is that the move will not expose one of your pieces to capture. By that we mean, okay, well, you can expose a piece to capture, but you want to have a positive exchange. So if it exposes a pawn to capture and you're gaining a bishop, okay, well, that's probably a good move. Or another caveat is if it leads to, or if you're looking to set up a potential mating pattern where you can checkmate and win the game. So let's look at this plain vanilla example right here. We have two rooks, and there cannot be a queen fork set up with these because they both defend each other, or at least not a successful one. So that does not work. Now let's shift gears to this example right here. We got two rooks spread out, and okay, so there's two pieces. They have no defender. Both paths intersect, and they intersect right at the D6 square. So that's good. Now the next question is the square undefended. Well, we have this knight on F7, and that's defending it, so that does not work. Now let's say we move the knight to F8. Okay, if you look at the D6 square, there's no defender, both paths intersect, and the square is undefended, so we move the queen there. And do we have a check fork? Well, not really, because black can simply take the B8 rook and move it to the B4 square, and now all the pieces are defended. So we do not have two pieces, or one piece for that matter, with no defender, so there's nothing white can take here. Now let's look at a game example here. Okay, we have this set up, and if you'd like to go ahead and hit pause and see if you can figure this one out. Okay, we have these two pieces. They're both undefended, the bishop and the rook. Now let's look at the horizontal and vertical paths of the bishop. Now let's look at the diagonal path for the rook. And if you notice, there's two intersection points, the A4 and the C6 squares. Now, if the queen were to move to A4, that won't work because the rook can simply move to A8 and defend the bishop. However, if we look at the C6 square, the queen can move there because there's nothing black can do to defend both pieces. So in summary, when you're trying to set up a queen fork, it can be a little bit complicated because you have to think on multiple levels. First off, you need two pieces with no defender for both moves, not just the current board, but no potential moves that can be defended, or at least your opponent can't see those potential moves to defend it. By that we mean, one of them cannot be defended on the next turn. Next, you need both paths to intersect. The square you're forking from has to be undefended. And keep in mind that the move you don't want the move to expose your pieces to capture. In other words, you don't want a bad exchange. And this wraps up our video on queen forks. Thank you for watching.